In the heart of Grayson's Hollow, where the wheat bent in the wind like bowed heads in church pews, there stood a crooked house with a slanted roof and a front porch that creaked as if remembering old steps. Folks in town called it the shed, though it had once been a proud home, before the bypass cut the old road and the children moved off to cities with too much noise and too little sky. The man who lived there was Emory Bell, a retired carpenter with shoulders shaped like hunched stone and hands that had forgotten how to tremble. He kept mostly to himself, rising with the sun and retiring with the first whisper of stars. The neighbors said he spoke to trees more often than people. A soft nod was his usual reply when someone greeted him at the market, if he went at all. But anyone with a broken chair leg or a rusted hinge knew they could knock on his paint-peeled door and find it mended by morning, no charge, no note, just fixed, like it had never been broken. Across from Emory's house was a dirt lot, just wide enough for a dozen cars if parked without care. It belonged to no one and everyone. Over the years, visitors to the general store or the crooked tavern down the street began treating it like theirs. They'd roll in, engines grumbling, and leave their trucks and sedans wherever they pleased, often right across Emory's narrow drive. At first, he wrote notes in tidy block letters. Please leave space for the driveway. Then, driveway access needed at all times. Eventually, just, don't block. The paper fluttered in the wind or was trampled in the mud, ignored with the same indifference given to a sigh. One Saturday afternoon, the church bells rang late, having been stuck again in the tower's aging mechanism. The store was busy, the tavern louder than usual, and cars lined the lot in disorder. Emory, carrying a sack of feed for his old hound Doggett, returned home to find his drive blocked by a sleek black truck with out-of-state plates. He waited. Minutes passed. He waited more. Then, with a resigned breath, he left the feed on the steps and walked back to town, down the same dusty road he'd taken as a boy, only now slower, with the weight of years in his knees. By the time he returned with help from a younger man and a borrowed wheelbarrow, Doggett was lying still beside the porch. The old hound hadn't barked or whimpered. Just gone quiet, as if the weight had worn him out. No complaint was filed. No knock on any door. Emory dug a shallow grave beneath the white oak behind the shed, the same tree he'd planted when his wife was still alive, when the world had felt just large enough. He carved a small plank of pine and drove it into the earth with the back of his hand axe. The words burned into it read, "Patience isn't free." People noticed, but only briefly. The sign was small, and Emory smaller in the memory of a town growing louder and more forgetful. A few teens chuckled when they passed, calling him the hermit of the hollow. The shopkeeper shrugged. Should have towed the truck, he said. But towing meant confrontation, and confrontation wasn't Emory's way. Spring passed into summer. The fields turned gold, then brittle. The general store began selling bottled lattes and Bluetooth radios. A new crowd came, weekenders from the city, eager for antique trinkets and authentic charm. They brought bigger cars and louder conversations. They blocked the driveway more often. Sometimes they didn't even notice the house across the lot. But Emory watched. He started going into town more frequently, though not to the store or the tavern. He visited the county clerk's office, quietly, with folders under one arm. He stopped by the library, asking for property maps and land use codes. His voice, though soft, had the firmness of someone carving with each word. He said little to no one, but things began to change. One early morning, while the fog still clung to the fields and the rooster next door was only halfway into his crow, Emory walked the perimeter of the dirt lot with a worn length of rope. He paused at each corner, driving small stakes into the ground, measuring like a man planning something quiet but exact. By noon, a wooden sign had been hammered into place. It read, "Private Drive. Do not block." People scoffed. Some said the sign looked nice, handmade, carved letters, stained and sealed like a craftsman's pride. But it didn't change their habits. The lot filled up as usual, blocking Emory's way as though the sign had been a decoration, not a warning. That night, Emory sat on his porch, whittling a scrap of walnut wood into the shape of a bird. He didn't watch the cars or the people. He stared into the oak's thick branches, where cicadas sang a dirge for the fading summer. The wind moved through his beard like an old friend passing through. By the time he rose, the street was empty, the lot bare. He walked across the dirt, slow but steady, and planted 4 more signs, one at each corner. They said nothing new, but they stood straighter than any car that had ever parked there. The next morning, a single black truck idled in front of them, reading the signs with confusion. The driver looked toward the shed. Emory was already walking away, hands behind his back, as if none of it concerned him anymore. It was the first morning in years his driveway stayed clear. Not because anyone had learned, but because someone had started to listen. In the weeks that followed, Emory's signs stood like sentinels at the edge of the dirt lot, unblinking and unbothered. Some days, drivers hesitated at their presence, like superstitious travelers before a threshold. Other days, they ignored them entirely. But something had shifted in the rhythm of the town, subtle as the creak of a new floorboard under an old rug. Emory, as usual, said little. He spent his mornings tending to a narrow row of tomato plants that clung to life along the south fence, and his afternoons inside, where the scent of varnish and sawdust still lingered like the last line of a prayer. The shed window flickered with lamplight long into the night. But it wasn't only tomatoes or carvings that drew his time. He visited the county offices with growing frequency, always with that same thin folder tucked beneath his arm. He requested old maps, dusty ledgers, and copies of property surveys drawn in ink so faded they looked like ghosts. He never raised his voice, never rushed. Just waited, like water carving its way through stone. Clara Fenimore, who had clerked for 20 years and knew everyone's secrets whether they offered them or not, began to wonder aloud. "He's digging for something," she told the mayor over coffee, tapping the rim of her mug. "Old men don't chase paper unless it means something." No one paid much attention. After all, what could a man like Emory want, except to be left alone? One Wednesday afternoon, when the light had softened and the wind carried dust in lazy spirals across the road, a sleek silver car pulled up in front of the dirt lot. It wasn't the kind the townspeople drove, this one had the quiet purr of something that cost more than Emory's whole house. The driver stepped out wearing polished boots and a blazer too stiff for Grayson's Hollow. He stood at the edge of the lot, surveying it with narrowed eyes, then approached Emory's porch with a practiced smile. "You must be Mr. Bell," he said, extending a hand Emory didn't take. "Name's Leonard Crisp. I represent Meridian Growth Group. We're working on a project that would be a real boon for the community." Emory motioned to the wooden steps. They groaned. "Careful." Leonard sat without hesitation, brushing off dust like it offended him. "We're offering to purchase this lot here," he said, gesturing behind him. "Big plans. We want to build a cafe, local charm, high quality, sustainable. Something your town can be proud of." Emory didn't speak. Leonard cleared his throat. "The lot's unclaimed. Public land, technically, but it's a bit messy. Hard to navigate without some help. We've done the legwork. County records, tax filings, zoning ordinances, you'd be surprised how easy it is to tie things up when you know the right people." But then your name came up. Emory set his knife down on the rail. "Half of it's mine." Leonard blinked. "That's not entirely certain." Emory's tone didn't shift. "It is. My grandfather left it. Lines changed when the road did. Nobody cared. Now someone does." Leonard's smile stiffened. "Look, Mr. Bell. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to make a deal. We'll pay handsomely for your portion. You wouldn't even need to move a nail. Just sign, and we pave the lot. Everyone wins." The offer came with a crisp folder, clean as a pressed shirt. Emory didn't touch it. He looked past Leonard, across the lot, to the oak tree behind his house. Its branches moved in the wind like a hand waving someone away. Leonard followed his gaze. "I understand you've had issues with parking. This would solve that. No more blocked driveway. Controlled access. Order." Emory rose slowly, knees popping like old floorboards. "Order," he echoed. Leonard smiled again, relieved. "Exactly. Let us bring order to this mess. Emory walked to the edge of the porch, one hand on the rail. Tell me, Mr. Crisp. What happens to the tree? Leonard hesitated. Well, to be frank, it's within the boundary. For access, it would have to come down. But we could plant another. Something ornamental. Emory turned to face him. You want to uproot a thing that stood longer than your company's name. And you'll replace it with something decorative. Leonard's smile faltered. It's just a tree, Mr. Bell. Emory's eyes, pale and steady, narrowed ever so slightly. It's never just a tree. He stepped back inside and shut the door with quiet finality. Leonard stood for a moment, folder still in hand, then left it on the step and walked away, dust rising in his wake. The next morning, the folder was gone. In its place, a hand-carved sign now stood at the lot's entrance, not for sale. Whispers stirred through town. Some admired the boldness, others called it stubbornness. But the conversation shifted. Folks began to remember that Emory's name was in the original township ledgers. That his family helped build the first road, long before tourists and cafes. The developer returned once more, offer doubled, smile sharpened. Emory didn't answer the door. A week later, another letter arrived, legal jargon cloaked in civility, a threat dressed as opportunity. Emory read it over dinner, then set it beside the wood stove and fed it to the flames. From then on, he put up more signs. Not angry, not flashy, just clear. Private drive. No parking. Respect the boundary. They were ignored at first. Until someone found their tire deflated. Then another received a polite but pointed letter quoting property code and citing recent surveys. The message settled in slowly, like snowfall that no one expects to stick. The town had underestimated the man in the shed. He didn't curse. He didn't shout. He read, he carved, and he waited. And the cars began to disappear. Autumn crept into Grayson's Hollow with a quiet dignity. The wheat fields turned brittle and golden, the sky deepened to a thoughtful blue, and the smell of wood smoke began curling from chimneys that hadn't breathed in months. Emory Bell, the man in the shed, kept his windows open just enough to hear the rustling leaves, reminders that change, though slow, was always near. The lot across from his house stood oddly empty now. Cars passed but didn't linger. The tourists had thinned with the cold. The developer's polished boots had not returned. Even the townsfolk had begun parking further down, near the post office or the Baptist church. Some out of respect. Some out of caution. A few, perhaps, out of guilt. But the quiet did not last. A new player arrived in a car that growled low and angry, its red paint catching the evening sun like a wound. It parked just inside the boundary, defiantly, and a tall man stepped out, his frame wrapped in a leather coat that looked too new for country wear. He took his time, walking the lot with long, purposeful strides before knocking, firmly, on Emory's door. "I'm not here to dance around papers," the man said, before Emory could greet him. "I'm Raiden Cole. I work for Meridian, but let's say my methods aren't gentle." Emory leaned slightly on the doorframe. "Then let's say you picked the wrong porch." Raiden grinned. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm a closer. And I'm giving you one last chance to be smart. Meridian doesn't like loose ends." "Loose ends don't worry me," Emory replied. "It's the knots people tie themselves into that concern me." Raiden chuckled, as if amused by a dog that didn't know its size. "We could make things difficult. Dispute the land in court. Drag it through zoning hell. Make sure you wake up to survey stakes driven through your tomatoes. Or," he pulled a thick envelope from his coat. "You take the buyout. Right now. Quiet, clean, generous." Emory stepped forward and pointed to the oak tree behind his house. "You see that?" Raiden barely glanced. "A tree." Emory's voice didn't rise, but it carried. "It shaded my wife's rocker. Held up the tire swing my boy played on. It's buried more memories than you've ever had roots in one place." Raiden raised an eyebrow. A tree doesn't stop progress, old man. It doesn't have to, Emory said, turning toward the porch. But I do. Raiden smirked. Then let's make a wager. Emory paused. Here's how it goes, Raiden continued. You open that lot to the public for 1 weekend. No signs, no threats, no petty notes. Let the people do as they will. We'll send a film crew, get some pictures, paint it as community use. If it looks like no one minds, that lot becomes common ground. The county won't even flinch. And if folks behave? I walk. Meridian drops it. And if they don't behave? Emory asked. Raiden shrugged. Then it's yours, fair and square. Public sentiment turns your way. We back off. But only if you're brave enough to trust your neighbors. It was a cruel bargain, thinly veiled. Raiden was betting that the townsfolk, long numb to the quiet protests of an old man, would return to old habits. That they would fill the lot, block the drive, ignore the tree, and prove Emory wrong in the space of 48 hours. Emory stared at the man for a long moment, then nodded once. Sunday at dusk, he said. When the last car leaves, you answer to the outcome. Raiden agreed with a smile that showed too many teeth. News of the open lot weekend spread quickly, though no one quite knew where it came from. The store's cashier mentioned it with a smirk. Teens buzzed about a place to gather without rules. One flyer appeared at the community board, no names, just, use it or lose it. This weekend only. Saturday arrived with a wind that carried the smell of cider and distant bonfires. Cars began rolling in before noon, first the usuals, then visitors from out of town. Lawn chairs appeared. A food truck idled by the edge of the lot. Music began to drift from speakers propped in open trunks. Someone dragged out folding tables for a pop-up market, selling carved keychains and locally jarred honey. Emory watched from his porch, Doggett's collar now hanging from a nail on the rail. He didn't speak. Didn't stop anyone. He watched the lot fill again, this time with permission. But permission did not mean respect. By mid-afternoon, someone reversed into his fence. A group of teens climbed the oak's lower limbs, snapping twigs as they shouted into their phones. One woman parked fully across the drive and walked off without a glance. Empty soda cans appeared in his tomato beds. A small child urinated on the tree's roots, unnoticed by the chattering crowd. Raiden arrived just before sunset, hands in his coat, grinning. Community spirit, he said. Emory remained still. Sunday came, brisk and bright. The crowd grew thinner by noon. By dusk, only the trash remained, paper cups flattened in mud, a torn banner tangled in the fence wire, and deep tire ruts carved into the soft ground near the tree. Emory walked the lot alone, one hand brushing the oak as he passed. He carried no anger. Only the quiet weight of something confirmed. As the sun sank, Raiden returned, stepping from his red car with a knowing smirk. Well? Emory handed him a single slip of paper, weathered, signed, notarized. Raiden unfolded it, expecting a deed, a permit, some legal threat. What he read was a bill of sale. For the other half of the lot. Raiden looked up, confused. Who? Mrs. Holloway, Emory said. Widow across town. Her father owned the parcel beside mine. Never updated the records. She didn't know it still had value. But I asked. Raiden's face twitched. I own it all now, Emory said. And I've got every violation photographed, time-stamped, and documented. Not just this weekend, every one. You gambled, Mr. Cole. Raiden clenched the bill. You tricked me. No, Emory said, walking back to his porch. You invited yourself into a man's yard and bet he wouldn't care. The wind rustled the oak, and the last of the light dipped behind the fields.